Italian Pie is proud to support WYES and this episode of Wall Street Wrap-Up, and to promote the importance of financial literacy and education.
Hi, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh, in for Andre Laborde. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up for this Friday, February 10th. Coming up, we will have part 2 of Andre's interview from last week about the future of so-called cord cutting and its impact on cable TV with the rise of streaming services. Andre's guests will be Bloomberg's arts and entertainment editor Felix Gillette and John Koblin, the television and media reporter for the New York Times. As you'll remember if you saw the show last week, they are co-authors of the book about HBO called It's Not TV, The Spectacular Rise, Revolution, and Future of HBO. That's coming up, but first a look at some of the business news headlines this week. President Biden gave an optimistic view of the future of the economy in his State of the Union address this week. And today he pointed to a January employment report as a sign of what he called the strongest job growth in history, with unemployment at 3.4%. However, a poll taken just before the president's address on Tuesday showed that only about a quarter of Americans, 24%, see the economy as doing well. Democrats who were surveyed in the Associated Press poll took a much better view than Republicans. At the same time, 57% of those surveyed said their personal financial situation was good. The Walt Disney Company this week announced that it plans to cut 7,000 jobs and slash $5.5 billion in cost as part of a major reorganization. Robert Iger announced the moves in his first earnings call since returning as CEO. One major change is the company will organize its movie and TV studios, TV networks, and streaming video services under a new division known as Disney Entertainment. It also puts content executives in charge of how to market and distribute their titles and be held accountable for their financial performance. If you're a football fan, we don't have to tell you. The Super Bowl is this Sunday, and Fox, the network which will carry the game between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles, says the game is a sellout when it comes to advertising. The asking price for most ads during the game was $7 million for a 30-second commercial. That's a record high. According to Fortune magazine, Anheuser-Busch remains the biggest advertiser, with 3 minutes of national airtime in the game. Other major advertisers include automakers and tech companies, packaged food makers like Doritos and M&Ms, movie studios, and streaming services. And speaking of streaming services, as we mentioned, we're going to bring you the second part of Andre's interview about cord cutting, streaming, and television with 2 experts in the field. And here's Andre now with that.
At one time, television was free, but not anymore. Felix Gillette is entertainment editor at Bloomberg's, and John Koblin is the media reporter at the New York Times, and they've both co-wrote a great book. It's Not TV. It's about the rise of HBO, and they're with us tonight. Felix, John, welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Netflix was just an upstart. In fact, they were doing battle with a company many years ago called Blockbuster. And there was a thought at HBO, look, it's very small. We can offer them $2 billion, which was basically chump change at the time, and for doing it. But what happened when they broached the idea of buying Netflix?
Yeah, there was this amazing moment in 2005, 2006, where there was a group of HBO executives on the West Coast that were working on business development, and they were looking at Netflix. And this was the era where Netflix's primary business was sending out DVDs by mail. And you would go to their website, and you would look through all these titles and choose a couple. They'd send them out by the mail. And it was a really popular service. And HBO executives were looking at this, and they said, you know what? We should go out and buy this little upstart, and we combine Netflix with HBO. We would control another window, another way of reaching customers. We wouldn't have to go through the cable networks. We'd start to establish a direct-to-consumer relationship for the first time. And this would be a nice thing to have in our portfolio. So they drew up a proposal, and they put it together. It's a nice, 35-page slide deck. And they went to New York and they took it to their bosses and they sat down. They said, here, we have this great idea that, Time Warner has funds for, acquiring startups. And we have the, great idea that would be perfect for us. Let's go out and buy Netflix. And they started the presentation. Before they even got through it, their bosses said, nope, no way. We're not interested. This whole Netflix thing is a flash in the pan. It's going to go away. It's not for us. And they cut them off very quickly. And John and I were very interested in why, looking back at it, this was a grand miscalculation. Netflix, turned into this huge cultural force and this very valuable business. Why were they so quick to dismiss it? And I think the answer was that, these executives had just gone through this disastrous AOL Time Warner merger. And the takeaway from that was they had watched all these AOL people come in and with all these grand visions of how they were going to revolutionize the future of entertainment. And it all was pretty empty and it all fell apart very quickly. And so they came away with thinking, these internet people are just phonies. It's just, we've seen that before. We've seen the AOL thing. It's not for real. And Netflix, it's just another AOL. It's going to go away. Which it obviously did not. And
also to kind of add on to what you both are talking is that much later on, I think Chris Albrecht, who at the time was the CEO of HBO, I think he was having lunch or dinner with Reed Hastings, who is the co-founder and CEO. And he relayed this story of how we were going to offer to buy you for $2 billion. And what did Reed Hastings say?
He said it at the time, he probably would have done it.
You'd have bought it. Now, to give the audience an idea, at the time, that was $2 billion. And today, it has a market cap of over $300 billion today. I'm talking about Netflix. That's as of about a year ago. There are certain things when it comes that we talked about network television and series television. Probably one of the most, if not the most popular series today is Yellowstone. I mean, it's spawning 1883, the prequel to it, 1923, the prequel to it. And it's on Paramount, the Paramount Plus network. At one time, was HBO involved with Yellowstone?
The pitch for Yellowstone did pass through HBO before Viacom Paramount ended up buying it. And like a lot of things, HBO really positioned itself over the years. It wanted always to be the port of first call where creators would come and aspire to get their drama onto HBO Sunday nights. And, that gave them an advantage in the fact that they would hear pitches first. The downside of it over the years proved to be that, they said no to a lot of things. And some of those things ended up turning into nothing. And occasionally something they passed on would turn into a huge cultural force. I mean, the most famous one in HBO's history, which had a lot of internal consequences at the time, was that HBO passed on Mad Men, which turned into an enormous hit for AMC. And the creator of Mad Men, Matthew Weiner, had been a writer for The Sopranos. He desperately wanted to do his show for HBO. He got David Chase, who was, the creator of The Sopranos, an incredibly important figure in HBO's history. He got David Chase to take it to the network executives and say, look, there's, this writer on the show. He has this idea. Let's, it'd be perfect. And they passed on it. People ended up losing their jobs, essentially, because they missed out on that one.
Also, I guess now they had to be worried about getting scooped because just as you're talking about, they've passed on certain things. They were about to sign the deal on House of Cards, a Washington insider's view of what's going on. And they thought for sure they're going to be having House of Cards. But what happened?
Yeah, that's when Netflix decided to get into original programming. So Netflix, which we remember back in the 2000s as the DVD business, as the DVD company. You want a movie? They send you a DVD of it. In 2007, they introduced their streaming service. And for the next 3 years, everything that was on Netflix.com had been licensed from the traditional Hollywood studios. They weren't making original content. And by early 2011, that's when Netflix decided we're going to get into the game. So HBO is used to being the port of call. You are going to HBO first, especially if you have a huge project. starring Kevin Spacey, Robin Wright, David Fincher is attached. But Netflix swooped in and offered something that no network, no studio had ever offered before, which was a 2-year commitment for a deal worth 9 figures. Nobody had ever seen anything like this. So the House of Cards team said, okay, Netflix has never made a show before, but let's try this. And it shocked HBO when they saw they had been outbid significantly by Netflix. That was one of Netflix's first offerings in original content. And in the 9 years and the 10 years since it premiered, Netflix has made hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of original programs, far more than HBO at this point.
One of the other things that Netflix offered was that they would have no notes. They would not promise to send any notes to a creative person as a director who's filming. The last thing you want to hear are from the suits in the executive branch telling me how to direct my TV show or how to do that. So I wonder, yes, the money was important. Yes, the 2-year commitment, but also I don't have to hear from the guys for the executives. I don't want to hear your thought process.
Yeah, that was probably the cherry on top at that point, because the broadcast networks, they were notorious in that era of just noting you to death. So many notes where all of sort of the creative elements of a series would just be sucked away. HBO is notorious for very few notes, but the notes they gave were usually really, really critical to helping make a series get on the air and for it to succeed. But yes, Netflix came out from the get-go and said, literally zero, no notes, nothing. Just make any show you want, and we will put it on the internet. So it was quite a nice cherry on top for David Fincher.
When it comes to, with networks and we're passing up on television, you had some comedy shows such as, I know Roseanne Barr and Tim Allen originally wanted to do, and I assume because of the fact of what you're talking about, they could be more of their normal stand-up and be more edgier. They went to HBO first, and they were turned down by HBO before having going to ABC.
Yeah, this is going back to the late 1980s. And this was part of what Michael Fuchs was saying. Michael Fuchs said, we don't make episodic television. So despite the fact that Tim Allen and Roseanne Barr, they had relationships with HBO because they were doing their stand-up specials on HBO in the late 80s, they said, hey, we have an idea. Roseanne wants to do a situation comedy about a working class family. HBO just had to say no to it. They had to say no to Tim Allen. And a lot of talent sort of walked out the door.
Also, there were some things that were not put on the air. I was surprised that they even went so far as finish casting, but they were going to be doing a show, and I don't know if it was a series or a mini-series on the fight between Donald Trump and Steve Wynn, and they were going to call it Trump versus Wynn, about the casino moguls. What happened there?
Yeah, that's a fascinating behind-the-scenes story. And the idea was that we're going to do a series about, or an original movie about this battle between Trump and Wynn in Atlantic City. And the project went pretty far. Danny DeVito signed on to direct it, and they went and did trips to Atlantic City. And they were starting to make offers to the actors that were going to play the main characters, including Christopher Walken as Trump and Harvey Keitel as Steve Wynn. And as they were just, hiring crews, getting the whole thing into production, Danny DeVito got lured out to a friendly dinner with Donald Trump. And Donald Trump had been vocally opposing this this project. He thought HBO was going to make him look kind of clownish. So his lawyers had been writing to HBO saying, this is, not something we're going to participate in. You're going to open yourself up to lawsuits. He'd been really aggressively trying to get it shut down. All of those efforts had failed at that point. But then he got Danny DeVito out to dinner. And the next morning, the producer, who was leading the project at HBO, got a call from Danny DeVito. Danny DeVito said, you know what? I'm out. Next time you do a show, if it's about, a movie about people that are dead, I'm in, but I can't do this. It's too much. And he backed out. And once he backed out, the whole thing fell apart. And it's one of those moments of HBO history that never made the air.
If you're just joining us, we're talking with Felix Gillette. John Koblin wrote a great book called It's Not TV, It's HBO. And we'll be right back. If you're just joining us, we're talking with John Koblin and also Felix Gillette, authors of the book called It's Not TV. Another thing that never made the air was there was an HBO executive, I think he was the CEO, the one in charge, and his name was Chris Albrecht. Now, they had, like we talked about before, was that one of the moneymakers for HBO were fights because they dealt towards men. It was cheaper to put on, but it was a good moneymaker. And they had a Floyd Mayweather, Oscar De La Hoya fight in 2008 or 2009. And all the big wigs flew into the MGM Grand. But the Las Vegas police had a problem after the fight. There was something going on. What happened?
It's 3:00 in the morning after the fight. Chris Albrecht ended up getting arrested for attacking his girlfriend in the parking lot outside the MGM Grand. And this was actually 2007. And shortly thereafter, Chris Albrecht was fired from the network. And 2007 ended up being a very difficult year for HBO, in part because, they lost their CEO. At the same time, their most famous show, the show that everyone loved watching, The Sopranos, was coming to an end, and they were trying to find out a new series that could kind of replace that. There was a writer's strike in Hollywood. It was really this moment where HBO had been on this incredible run, and by mid 2007, with all these things going on, its competitors actually started calling HBO over, because people thought, this is it. The magic is done. They're going to fall apart. And, they had a rocky patch for a couple of years, and they managed to find their stride again and really correct course and survive all these things, as they have done for 50 years.
But one of the things, Felix and John also, one of the things that y'all were able to uncover was, now this was in 2007, was it, you said?
Mm-hmm.
2007,
yeah.
But the HBO tried to keep something quiet that occurred many years earlier with an HBO executive named Sasha Emerson. What happened there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Sasha Emerson was a programming executive who had been working at HBO for a number of years. And when Chris Albrecht was arrested in Las Vegas in 2007, the Los Angeles Times came out with a story reporting that in 1991, I guess 16 years earlier, there'd been this previous incident where Chris Albrecht had allegedly attacked his coworker, Sasha Emerson, in the offices at HBO's headquarters in Los Angeles. And this incident had basically ended up with a settlement paid off to Sasha Emerson. She left the network. Chris Albrecht was allowed to stay. And, it was, the whole thing had been covered up and had not seen the light of day, even though plenty of people in Hollywood had heard about it. Plenty of people knew about it. This is pre-Me Too. This was kind of a different era of Hollywood. And, we get into that in the book. And when that came out in 2007, that was kind of the final straw that, the Time Warner executives, it was a little unclear before that story in the LA Times came out. Was Chris Albrecht going to hang on, or was they're going to force him to leave? And once the LA Times story came out, that kind of pushed it over. They ended up firing their CEO and moving on.
Because one of the things I assumed that was going to be tough for them was that the CEO at the time, or maybe the head of Time Warner, was Jeff Bewkes. And from what I understand, mm-hmm. Jeff Bewkes was best friends with Chris Albrecht. So if there was any firing to do, the best friend was going to have to do it. So he was trying to hope to keep the wolves at bay, but the problem was just escalating too much.
Yeah, Jeff Bewkes was, he had been the CEO of HBO after Michael Fuchs. And, he had worked his way up the corporate ladder at Time Warner, and he was actually kind of the heir apparent. He was being groomed essentially to take over as the CEO of all of Time Warner at that point. But the deal hadn't been done yet, and so he was still. I think the board of directors at the time was still kind of reviewing him. For his perspective, it happened at a very bad time, and he was friends with Chris Albrecht and they'd worked together quite closely throughout the years, and it ended up being left to Jeff Bewkes to have to actually be the one to fire his friends and who reported to him. So there was a lot of drama. 2007, just kind of a dark part in HBO's history for sure.
And I would assume because of the wanting to sweep it under the rug, very few people at HBO even knew what was going on.
Yeah, I think it was definitely a surprise to a lot of people. It was definitely a surprise to, the public and to everyone, the analysts. And this was a publicly traded company. This was an enormous cultural force in American life at that point. And so it was pretty shocking that there could have been this previous incident that had gone unreported to shareholders, that had gone unreported to the public. But again, this is pre-Me Too. This was a different era of Hollywood. And, if that happened today, I think it would have played out much differently. But again, that was a very, very different era.
Well, it's not TV. It's HBO. One more question, guys. When you see a show, plenty of times like on the E! Network, you have a lot of the reruns of Sex and the City. The History Channel plenty times has Band of Brothers, which was the HBO show. When you have shows like that, does HBO have a financial interest when History Channel buys it or E! Or does that only go to the producers themselves? Because I'm wondering, popular shows like The Sopranos, who gets financially reimbursed for this?
HBO definitely benefits from it, but actually HBO has been very reluctant over the years to license its programming. They've usually wanted to keep it on HBO. They've dabbled with a few experiments here and there where they did license The Sopranos City to cable, but they're really the outliers. For the most part, HBO has really protected its library. However, that is about to change. HBO's new corporate overlords, Discovery Inc., that now they are part of a broader company called Warner Brothers Discovery. When that company formed in April of last year, they came saddled with $50 billion in debt, and they have to start paying that down immediately. So one of the things that they are showing a willingness to do, which they hadn't for the most part for 50 years or so, they're getting ready to license some of their library to others, and that includes other rivals. So just as what Felix said at the top.
Netflix also, you think?
It's very possible. I mean, let's put it this way. It's been on the table, but I think the HBO executives have said, what are we saying about ourselves if we are licensing to our chief rival? So probably not Netflix, but I know for a fact through reporting that it had been floated in recent months. And I think they've sort of walked away from it. But could we license to an Amazon? Could we license to a Hulu? I think all that's really on the table right now. So just as when Felix said this at the top, we started reporting this book in 2019. This HBO is really at this inflection point where AT&T were their new corporate overlords. Are they going to destroy HBO? What's going to happen? The answer is no. And right now there is another question going on in Hollywood. What is Discovery going to wind up doing with HBO? The thing that HBO has done year after year, despite whatever corporate headaches there have been, whether it was AOL or AT&T or currently Discovery, is hit after hit after hit. If you just consider the last few months, HBO in the summer, they premiered House of the Dragon, its much anticipated Game of Thrones spinoff. HBO had a lot riding on that. It was a huge hit. Then, once that went off the air, they turned to The White Lotus, a second season of a critically beloved show, which premiered in 2021. That was a huge hit. And that went off the air a few weeks ago. HBO's next bet is The Last of Us, a show that is adapted from a video game, very un-HBO-like. The early reviews are out, and people are saying it is the best video game adaptation ever, and HBO will be able to ride that wave for 9 weeks.
The book is called It's Not TV, It's HBO. Felix Gillette, John Koblin, thank you for spending some time. Thoroughly enjoyed the book, and I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. Thank you so much for having us.
If you want to see more of the first part of Andre's interview with the authors, you can find that on the WYES YouTube page. And a reminder, you can always watch the show there each week once it premieres on Friday night. And as always, if you have a question about finance or a comment about the show, Andre would love to hear from you. You can send your comments to Andre at wallstreetwrapup.info, and that's the program for this week. I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Andre will be back next week for another edition of Wall Street Wrap Up. Until then, have a good evening.
Italian Pie is proud to support WYES and this episode of Wall Street Wrap Up, and to promote the importance of financial literacy and education.